this video, we're going to focus on converting stitches to like a runner steel. These are like your border stitches. They don't fill in the area. They just fill out the lines, the outlines in an object. So you can see I have some varying designs here. I have one with points in it, a little bit rounded, and then just some more that have a lot of curves and bends to them. And the reason I chose these is to show you kind of what you have to work with and what can happen if you are working with something that is simple or complex. So I'm going to select this orange one right here, and I'm going to choose a run stitch. And when I do that, you can see that it creates it pretty well here. There's no issues. A run stitch is very easy for a software to create. And if you're wondering where I get these images, they're just inside of the custom shapes, this icon up here. I'm only working with designs inside of the custom shape, so you can recreate these yourselves very easily. So I have this run stitch. I can make changes to the run stitch in the properties box. We're not going to focus on properties of stitches right now. We'll do a little bit, but not much. I can change the stitch length if I wanted to. Now let's go ahead and convert this one to a running stitch. And you'll see that it does a pretty good job as well. And like I said, run stitches are pretty easy to work with. And this is about 3.4 inches by 3.4 inches. Let's go ahead and convert this one to a running stitch. And you can see that it does a good job as well. And this one as well. And you can see it goes and it finds all the edges and does a really good job in converting it. So let's see what happens when we start choosing some of the other options for outlining. Again, these are about 3.4 to 3.5 inches in size. So these are decent size. They're not huge, but they're a pretty decent size. So let's go ahead and click on the motif. And you'll see that the motif, it does a pretty good job here. You'll notice that the pattern size is about 5. That's pretty standard. Now I could change the motif type, and by doing so, I might get a little bit better or cleaner looking results. So if I zoom in here, it does a pretty good job at this size. And I can just kind of play around with it. The moment I start like making it smaller, it's a little bit more difficult for the software to generate and make it look clean. As you can see here, when I get to just under 2 inches, it's struggling to keep it looking nice. So it's just something that you will want to keep in mind when you're working with objects and converting them. The other part of it is knowing what size it will work for it. So let's go ahead and go to the steel stitch now. Let's convert this to a steel stitch. And you can see it does a pretty good job at this size. I don't really have many complaints here. This is a 2.5 millimeter wide steel stitch. Let's go ahead and make it smaller. You can see it still does pretty decent. I'm at about 2.2 inches. Let's go down below 2. It's still 2 inches. Let's get it down. This is about 1.8. And it still does a fairly decent job here. So you can see the versatility. A steel stitch you can do quite a bit with. And a steel stitch is, as I click and drag it off, you can see it still is working with an outline. It's just doing an exact width and keeping that width throughout the entire structure. And let's go ahead now, and before we get too far into it, let's go ahead and convert this one to a motif. And you can see doing a motif with this shape, because there's so many curves in it, it's very difficult to get it to look well utilizing a motif. So you would really have to play around with the motifs and find one that will work decent for it. And you're going to find that it's going to need to be something a little bit thinner that's going to work a little bit better. Like that one's still kind of difficult for it. You start playing around with these and you'll just see that it's not going to retain the shape. It's not really going to do a good job of that. And it's just because it's the type of artwork it is. There's a lot of curves and bends in it. And when you're dealing with something that has a lot of, bends, it's not going to work as well, especially if they're kind of sharper bends when you're working with a motif. So let's go ahead and let's do the same thing this one. Let's do a motif to this one. And you can see that it's still, you can see the shape. And again, we're at about 3.5. If I go down from this, it's really going to start looking really choppy. And you're not going to be able to really recognize what it is. And yes, I can make the pattern size a little smaller, but you can't go very much smaller. You can maybe sometimes go down to a 3, but you really have to watch your stitch lengths at that point. And that'll allow me to go a little bit smaller and it still look okay. But you can see it'll still start getting kind of choppy. And that's just understanding the limitations, and you can change the different, types of stitch and stuff like that. But again, you're going to start seeing some different weird things with it, and the smaller you get it. And so that's all I wanted to really point out when it comes to motifs. Is just, kind of your size limitations. Now you can make this really large and it will look great. It's just you get to a certain point in making it smaller and it starts struggling. This one will probably struggle as much or more than the other one because there's a lot of bends and curves in it. Let's go ahead and convert that to a motif. And you can see it starts not looking very clear in here. And I can change that again to like a 3, and it will look a little bit better. It'll clean it up. So I could go down to maybe a 3 millimeter. I wouldn't want to go much smaller. So it would all come down to choosing the right type of stitch to maintain clarity, what type of motif, because some of them will look better than others, and it's just based on how the motif is. So that's kind of converting them to motifs. We did a motif to this one. Let's go ahead and do a steel stitch now for this one, and you can see it does a pretty good job. It'll look a little funny, but it does a pretty good job. I shouldn't say it looks funny. It'll stitch out looking pretty good here. I'm just talking more about how it decides to break up and do the corners. But it did a pretty good job. Let's go ahead and go to this one. We're at 3.45 in height. And if we go to a steel stitch, we're at 2.5. It looks pretty good. As I start getting down further, it still looks pretty good at 2.3. Let's get it down to 1.67. It starts kind of getting mixed up a little bit there, or bunched up. And so you can just see, if you want to test it, you can always test them. Just bring a design in and convert it over to a steel stitch and see how it looks. If you get the results you don't like, you might need to change the size. You're not going to want to go that much smaller, but you can go all the way down to a 1.5. And that's about as narrow as you would want to go. That's a pretty thin, satin line. You definitely don't want to go below that. And you can go up to 6 or 7. It'll look funny on this one because that's going to be really thick. I would need to make this a lot larger for it to get, better looking and stuff. You can even go to a 7. That's about as wide as anything you would do on something you wear. But you can see the cornering and stuff. It looks, it doesn't look great. You're going to mostly be between 2.5 and let's say 3.5 or 4 for your width of a steel stitch. Let's go ahead and convert this one over to a steel stitch. And you can see it does a pretty good job. So it looks pretty good. This is at a 2.5. And there are things that you can do with steel stitches that will be in other videos on how to actually manipulate it. Because you can affect how these angles, these corners are handled. And which is really nice that you have the ability to handle those. So if you get something that doesn't look quite how you want, you can modify it. So that's converting them to a steel. The other thing that we have is a steel run. And basically it's just the same steel stitch, but then it has a run stitch that goes through the middle of it. And you're able to change that run stitch. So let me go ahead. I have this one selected. Let me select all of them at one time, and I'm going to convert them all at the same time to a steel run. So one thing you notice right off the bat is the angles or the corners are handled much different with this tool. It's not using that same algorithm, if you want to call it that, for the steel stitch. So I can come over here to the steel and I can go to sharp, and that's in the steel tab, and sharp, and hit apply. And you'll notice it'll get me back to a similar look as the previous one. But like on this one, I don't mind it being a little softer in the point here. But you can see that run stitch that goes in the middle of it. You can see that in each of these. And that's something that you see actually fairly often these days, is a run stitch going over the top and a border for a steel stitch. And it just gives it a nice look. But the cool thing that you can do is when you're working with something a little bit larger, so let's go ahead and let's make these all a little bit larger, because you kind of need to for what I'm about to show you. You don't want to work with a tight, small object in doing this next thing. So I'm going to select this, and you can see that in the properties you have a steel first and then the run. You can change that. I can make the run stitch go first, but the point of this is to actually have the run stitch on top. So I'm going to keep it that way. I'm going to come over here to the type on the single run, and I can do a double run, or I can do a motif. So if I hit the motif, the cool thing is that it's now going to do a motif over the top of the steel stitch. And I'm going to come in here. You can see that these are the same color. I'm not sure why, but I'm going to select the second one and choose this green color. And now you're going to see that you have a motif on top of the steel stitch. And you can get some pretty neat effects with this. Let me come and change this one to a red, and let's do this one at a yellow. So you can, we'll do a green. You can just see the kind of effect you can get. Let me turn it off 3D view. It's kind of hard to see. I might change this background color to a gray. But you can see those stitches there, and it just creates a really neat effect. So it'll do this steel stitch, and then it will come right over the top with this motif. And you can change the motif to whatever you want. You just select the object, and you would come into the run tab, and you would select whatever motif pattern you want to border the steel stitch. I really like this effect. I think it really is pretty neat what you can do with it. Let's do the same thing to this one. Let's just come in here and let's change it from a single run to a motif and hit apply. And for some reason it wants to do these in pretty similar colors, so I'm going to change this one to, let's see, that one's a yellow, so let's do a red. And I would have to really zoom into this one to kind of see it, but you can see the yellow underneath of the red. And that motif pattern I can change from the default, and you can see the different looks that you can achieve by doing this. And it's just a pretty cool effect. Let's do this one. And I can even make that pattern larger, and I'll do that quite a bit actually, and make it go wider than the steel, and it will kind of wrap around it. Again, it's all in the motif that you choose. Okay, so this one might be kind of interesting. You can see that running around it. And so that just gives you a good idea of that steel run tool. You can achieve that same look yourself without using a tool. You can just copy and paste. If this was just a steel stitch, you could just copy and paste it and convert that pasted one to a run or a motif. It makes it easier with that tool. So I just wanted to show you that's how you can work with a one of these line tools, meaning a run stitch, a motif, a steel stitch, or a steel run. And again, all of these just work with the outer perimeter of a shape. It doesn't fill in the middle. And that's when we start using satins, and fills is when it will focus on the inside of a shape and not the outside of it. So anytime you need to border something, you will always use these four right here to do that. So we'll see you in the next video.